Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was June 1st, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Compagnona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's document takes us into the intricacies of ecclesiastical positions in a monastery in 14th century Crown of Aragon. And this is a Latin document. It's in a register of Violants. It's one of the secret seal registers. And it is one that is addressed to an archbishop. So the first challenge was to figure out which archbishop this was addressed to. There's a very clear addressee line at the bottom, and the first word is dirigitur, directed to, sent to, and then we have a very clear arch, and then episcopo, archiepiscopo, so very clear archbishop. And then we had T with an R abbreviation mark above it, and then RACOE with a macron above. And of course, that C at the end could be a T, but it looks a little curvy, so I went to C. And so I thought maybe, was this Tarasco? And I was like, no, I don't think so, because they usually don't leave out the S. And so then I was thinking, okay, I think it's Tarragona, but it looked so different. There was no G. And I went to the Wikipedia page for Tarragona, and lo and behold, right there in the Wikipedia page, it says that in Roman times it was known as Tarraco with a C. And just interestingly, for the etymology of this place name, it actually does relate to Aragon, because originally this place name was known as Ta Aragona. So the Ta, I think, is maybe like, oh gosh, for entrance, it's like a port. So it's a big, even today, it's a very large port city on the coast of the Mediterranean in Catalonia. And so we have here a very clear place name. So the Archbishop of Tarragona. Then we have in the Probata a pretty standard Domina Regina Mandawit Mihi. And I just want to say that the A for Regina is a pretty pronounced one, even though it's in a superscript in that Probata. And then in the next line, it's simply the name of the scribe, good old Bartolomeo Sirvent. Probably the scribe that I have the most experience reading. I think probably over half the documents I've looked at are Bartolomeo Sirvent over the duration of my studies, not in the podcast itself. All right, now we have the text itself. It's in Latin. There's a lot of stuff in here that was really difficult for me just trying to dive into it. I will absolutely say that the AI chatbots were very much doing the heavy lifting on this document. If I had done it myself, I could have done it, but it would have been a good 12 hours plus of work, just slogging through first the transcription and then the translation and figuring out how to parse the grammar. So, one issue is that the topic of this document is in and of itself one that I don't know much about. It gets into the role of a member of the canonry of a monastery. And I don't know that much, honestly, about how monasteries operated at this time or like any time. And so trying to understand what's happening in this document is just incredibly difficult. Just because there's a discussion here about this person's position, and I don't even know any of the context for what these paid positions were inside monasteries. So all of that is the heavy lifting done by Claude mostly. So this particular register was not one that I had in the OpenClaw pipeline. And honestly, when I started looking at this document, I was happy. I was happy that it hadn't been one of the 6 that I put through the OpenClaw pipeline, because for Latin documents, the OpenClaw pipeline has just consistently been not much use at all. The key piece that is missing from that agentic AI process is me going in and making corrections. So if you look at the PDF that I have on the webpage for today's episode, the one that's called E159 Claude Project Prompts, what you'll see is that I have Claude do an initial transcription, and then I put in the HTR handwritten text recognition product from Gemini and said, okay, Claude, check this against what you did. And then comes the really important part. I mean, this part I think is, I just don't think that it can do Latin without this next part. And the next part is me. Even though I am just nowhere near a high quality Latinist myself, I am able to make some interventions between what is called stage 2 and stage 3 in the project that I set up with Claude. And I'm able to go in and make some pretty important corrections to where Claude and Gemini didn't really get something correct that might be really important for the meaning of the document. So in this case, I just retranscribed about 3 different lines in this document. And so I put some work into this. I put about 20 minutes of work into doing some transcription here. So it's not like I just sat back and watched Claude do everything. But I mean, let's just still return to the main point here, which is that without Claude, I would have been completely lost with this document. So anyway, the human is in the loop when I'm using AI in the way that I did for this document, and the human is not in the loop with the OpenClaw agentic AI process. So even though the large language models have improved since the time that I did that agentic AI process, it's been, I think, over a month and a half, I still don't think I would want to spend time doing that again, at least at this point, for the Latin documents. I mean, it does work really well for the documents in Catalan or Aragonese. Okay, so that's the AI usage bit. So I made some corrections, and then I got a translation with ample footnotes from Claude, but I still didn't know what was going on in this document because I didn't understand anything about what it means to be a member of the canonry. All right, let's talk about the document itself, and I'll come back to that. Now, the first line does relate to my research question about co-rule. I've looked at, I think, 2 previous documents in the podcast in which Violant is recommending somebody for an ecclesiastical position. And I'm going to link to them because corroboration, the historical thinking skill of corroboration, is important at this point. So, in those earlier documents, Violant did not start the recommendation letter in the same way as how she's starting it here. In the first line, she begins Reverend Pater, Reverend Father, Archbishop. And then she says Dominus Rex, Dominus Moritus, et Dominus Nostri Carissimus. So that is the formulation that we've seen in Catalan. The Lord King, Lord my husband, Lord my most dear Señor, my most dear Lord. And again, Lord, I mean, we have to really think about this as just like a synonym for husband at this point. I don't think that we can read into it and say that she's expressing subordination to Joan. I think this is like just his title. All right. So it starts out referring to Joan, like just very similarly to what we saw yesterday. So then she says, Vobis scribit. And then there's a little it could be scribiti. There's a little mark above there, like scribitur. I'm not sure. But basically saying, he wrote to you. Okay. And then next, I'm a little bit shaky, but here it's something like, what is that abbreviation? SR. Something like Sancte Confirmatione vel nova provisione per vos. Then we have the word fienda. All right. He wrote to you about some kind of confirmation, or the word well. So at the end, it looks like a V, which is interchangeable with U in Latin. So VEL or UEL. Nova provisione, new provision for your fienda. I don't know what fienda means. But anyway, Bartolomeo Ponci. All right, so then we have the person's name. So it's some kind of new provision, probably some kind of monetary, some kind of salaried position, paid position. The word prebend comes up. That's an ecclesiastical term for like when there's a stipend for a particular person that is in some kind of ecclesiastical organization. Honestly, that word prebend is one that I didn't even really know before preparing for today's episode. So it just shows you like how far out on a limb I am with my own awareness of the intricacies of all the different ways that someone can have a paid role or a stipended role inside these ecclesiastical organizations. I don't know. Anyway, so some kind of new provision for Bartolomeo Ponci. And then we get, after Ponci, which is the surname, we get the title. And this is canonico, I think. So a canon. And then after that, we have the faintest little slash, and that indicates that we're talking about the place where he's a canon. And then we have a monastery, pretty clear that's an abbreviation for monastery. And then we have day. So it's some monastery. And initially, everybody, me and the large language models, we couldn't figure out the name of this monastery until I did a follow-up at the very end of the process with Claude, and I was like, look, I really just want to know the name of this monastery. Here are some possible transcriptions. We all got it wrong because we thought that the second letter of this place name was a T, so we thought it started out with ST, but it's actually a C. And this place name is Scornalbou. Scornalbou. It's kind of a unusual place name, something that seems a little bit odd for the various toponyms that tend to be happening in this region, I'd say. And it is actually a portmanteau, so like two words put together. I think I'm using that term right. But anyway, it's the horn of an ox. So scorn, a horn, and then albu, an ox. This building still exists. And yes, it's near Tarragona. It's like 25 kilometers away from Tarragona up in the mountains. And I'll put a link to it in the webpage for today's document. So it is a place that's just named, after the horn of an ox. Not quite sure why. And there's a monastery near there. So it's the Monastery of Scornalbou. And then we have Day, which really confused me because I thought we were going to get a further place name here. But in the end, what I realized was that actually the Day is referring to the group of people who are in the monastery. So the eodem at the end of the line is the clue, where eodem basically means of the same. So what is being expressed here is that Bartolomeo is in the canonry of this monastery, and then, well, he's known as a canon. He has a title. Okay, sorry, I just messed that up. Okay, I said it right, but I was thinking it wrong. Oh my gosh. So the first canonico is his title. He's known as a canon. And then the end of it is saying, of the canonry of the same, meaning linking back to the monastery. So this basically starting from his name, what we can translate this as Bartolomeo Ponci, canon of the Monastery of Scornalbou, of the canonry of the same. Right. So basically, he's a canon of the canonry of the Monastery of Scornalbou. Gosh. Yeah, and we're just on line 2, and we haven't even gotten to what is being discussed here. So as best I can tell, and the vagaries of like why this was even up for discussion, like why is there all of this justification and verbiage needed for this? I just don't know. There might have been some kind of controversy because there's one phrase toward the end that really sticks out. But before we get to that, I just want to try to summarize what is going on here. It seems that for some reason, and I'm only like 25% sure of this, but Claude seems to think that there's language in here that indicates the original funding or the original granting of Bartolomeo for this canonry. It was on shaky ground for some reason, and so it needed to be renewed. It needed a new provision. And that's what this letter is accomplishing. Basically, Violant saying that she supports Bartolomeo having this provision again. But it's not just that she's doing it, remember, it's that it starts out by saying that the king has already written to you about this. So it's like reminding the Archbishop of Tarragona. Like, why people need reminders, I don't know. Is this basically saying something along the lines of what she would write to a governor who's dragging his feet on following some kind of instruction? I mean, here in this document, we're not getting any scolding language, but we do get something else, which is in the, let's see, fourth to last line of the text block. We have this phrase, esset, it's right in the middle, esset valde absurdum. So she's using this word absurd, like basically saying, if you don't do this, it would be absurd. So basically, she's not giving him an out. It's not like, oh, you would please us greatly if you did this. That kind of language, which we have seen in other documents, is not here. It's almost like she wants to be saying the usual phrase, we are astonished that you have not done this. But she's writing in a different context, and I think she's, not treating this archbishop as a subordinate, but instead as someone who's got lower status for sure, but is not in her like direct chain of command below her. And so here we have a different word choice, I think. And of course, the fact that it's in Latin makes it harder to understand the tone and how unusual or strong it might have been to use the word absurdum. But I don't know. It seems to me to stick out. So, what was the issue with Bartolomeo Ponci? Why did Violant think it was so absurd that the Archbishop of Tarragona had not acted on this already or would even think of not doing it? I don't know. The details of this case are, I think, possibly lost, but it's going to have to take somebody else to really dig around in this. Unless somehow I see this come up again, I'm just going to leave that to somebody else who's really interested in the intricacies of the various ecclesiastical jockeying of positions. But I think for my purposes, I know enough about this document to say that we have just this shift that I'm noticing. I'm going to have to go back to some earlier documents and see if in communications about ecclesiastical positions, Violant is doing the same thing, because it seems new to me the way she starts the letter. It seems new. It seems like something has shifted after Joan has almost died and been lingering, and I think that we might see this formulation more and more. So I'm going to keep a lookout for when Violant starts letters like this, where it's this direct invocation of how she knows what Joan has done, and now she is picking up the baton, as it were. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job, because remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes, and listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.